Hi, everyone. We're just going to give a couple minutes here for folks to log on. Welcome to the IDCCA virtual training series. Glad that you all could join us here tonight. I'm just going to give a few more minutes. Folks are getting logged on here and let everybody get situated. If we haven't met before, my name is Jillian Hawkins. I'm the Assistant Executive Director here at the IDCCA. And welcome to the virtual training series. If this is your first time, this is an ongoing training series from the IDCCA to help our volunteers, organizers, and county chairs be the best that they can be. We're a small group, but why don't we go ahead and take a few seconds while we're waiting for some more folks to join. Introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your role at the party, and where you're from. And while we're doing that, I will go ahead and introduce our guest speaker tonight. We are joined by Ben Head. He is he works with Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky. He has many years of political organizing all throughout the state, building strong political organizations, very experienced, and we're very glad that he could join us here tonight. To talk about phone banking and how we can best have those conversations with voters over the phone. So Ben, I will go ahead and turn that over to you.
Thank you, Jillian. I appreciate the introduction. Took me a while to realize that experienced is what younger people call you when you're old. So thank you. So as Jillian mentioned, my name is Ben Head. I serve as Congresswoman Schakowsky's political director. I've worked on a variety of campaigns over the years, doing electoral and issue organizing pretty much my whole adult life, if you want to call me an adult. So what we're here today to talk about, and by the way, if anybody has any questions while I'm talking, feel free to shoot a hand up in the hand up icon, and I will call on you as soon as I finish my breath. So we're here to talk a little bit about phone organizing and active listening. Right, and how to utilize active listening skills to become a better organizer over the phone. Right, so just to start off, a couple of things to understand about phone banking. Right, is anyone here unfamiliar with phone banking? Like, has never tried it or doesn't, unfamiliar with the practice? Perfect. Okay. So you guys have all done this once or twice. At least you got a sense of it. So you guys already know then that, phone banking is a high impact, high volume method of outreach. And what's nice is that it ignores geographic limitations. And that makes it a really good tool in dense urban areas where you've got high rises that are hard to knock doors in. It also makes it really helpful in more rural areas where homes are spread out and you're able to hit fewer doors per hour than you would in, like a single family suburban neighborhood, right? So depending on the universe that you're looking at and what your turf looks like, you may choose to phone bank, either in addition to or in some cases instead of canvassing. When you go to do that, when you go to do your phone banking, first remember it's just like knocking doors in the sense of you've got basically two things that you want to do at the doors. You're either doing persuasion ID, saying, can my candidate count on your vote? Right. The second thing is GOTV, actually turning people out to vote, right? And generally speaking, what you want to do with the field campaign, right, is ID enough voters so that if you turn them all out, leading up to election day, that's enough votes to win, right? That's sort of the yardstick of an ideal field campaign, is you have enough positive IDs on election day to hit your win number by turning out those voters. And then you do turn out those voters. When it comes to phone banking, there's a third kind that doesn't really come up door to door as much, and that's volunteer recruiting and fundraising. It's a very similar process, one to the other. Like most things in a campaign, you start by making a list of people, and then you make asks of each of those people. So in a volunteer recruiting standpoint, right, you're asking folks for their time. And in a fundraising standpoint, you're asking folks for their money. Depending on who you're talking to, they might have a little bit of one, not so much of the other. Might have both, may have neither, right? But understanding who your audience is when you're making those asks is important. So what we're going to talk about today is really how you have a meaningful two-way conversation over the phone with a voter or potential volunteer, potential funder, right? And the thing about voter contact like this is it is the great equalizer on campaigns. Gubernatorial candidates do it, as does for day one interns, as do volunteers, right? So it's everyone on a campaign for the most part, with the exception of maybe pollsters and so forth, is doing direct voter contact. What you'll find, though, is that folks that are very good at this, that understand the process, are able to have a meaningful two-way conversation, whereas other folks that are still learning tend to just sort of read the script at the moment, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Reading the script verbatim is absolutely okay. But if you want to try to sort of move your persuasion abilities into the next level, whether that's convincing a voter to vote for you, convincing a volunteer or a funder to support you, in either situation, having a two-way conversation is key. And what do I mean by a two-way conversation, right? Well, so far, this has not been a two-way conversation. I've just been talking to you, right? And if we had more time today, I would have really liked to start out with a little bit of conversation amongst us and everyone introduce themselves, because that would have, but I do want to get right to the chase on this. So conversation is super important. You guys have all been on the other line when somebody calls you and you can tell it's like a telemarketer. Because they're reading, and they sound just like this. Hi, is this Gary Williamson? Oh, hi, is this Jimmy Neville? Well, great. My name is Ben, and I just wanted to ask you about this candidate that I'm working with. Their name is blah, blah, blah. I was wondering if they could count on your support. They're really good at the issues that we care about, including gun control, women's rights, as well as providing jobs and building a good good middle class through good paying jobs. So can they count on your vote on November 2nd? Right? Not great, but better than nothing. Right. But what you really want to do, right? The problem with doing that is there's this instinct, right, to try to front load everything you're saying to the person. Don't try to do that. Right. So let's go through really quick. There's basically sort of three key things to remember about effective voter outreach strategies as it applies to activism, right? So first things first, you need to identify yourself early on, right? This is especially helpful if you are either a volunteer or if you are the candidate themselves, right? If you are staff, it's still helpful. But identifying yourself as hi, my name is Ben, and I'm a volunteer with Jillian Hawkins' campaign for president. When you're throwing that out there, I'm a volunteer, right? Is a good thing to open with, because it helps people connect, right? It makes people more likely to want to hear what you have to say next, basically. And the point of identifying yourself early is to provide context for that person, right? So what I just told you when I called you for Ms. Hawkins' presidential campaign is, hi, my name is Ben. I'm a human being. I am a volunteer, right? And I'm calling with this person's campaign, right? And the reason that's important is because it helps set a frame of reference, right? So if you were sitting at a restaurant and some random person came up to you and said, hey, what do you want to eat? You'd be weirded out, right? But if that was the waiter, well, that's what they're supposed to do. You're not, that's a perfectly normal interaction, right? What you're trying to do is provide them with the context they need right away to comfortably engage with you, right? So by announcing yourself as a volunteer and which campaign you're with, as well as your first name, you're humanizing yourself, and you're letting them know you're calling them about a political campaign. Now, they may choose at that moment that they don't want to talk to someone over the phone about a political campaign at that given moment. Maybe they generally don't do that. Maybe they've got something on the stove. Maybe they've got a kid crying in the other room. There's a million reasons why somebody might not be open to conversation at that moment. But by introducing yourself that way, you're giving the person the opportunity to understand what it is you're about to, to give them some context for what you're about to launch into, and sort of to help them process it, That makes sense. Can anybody give me an example of, another time or another situation where this might like play a role?
You mean phone banking would play a role?
Oh, or really anything in life, not necessarily even in phone banking, right? Where we're providing that context on the front end is really important to the rest of the conversation.
When you're speaking in front of a group of people?
Yep, absolutely. That's a great one, right? You need to let them know, for example, as Jillian did, this is Ben, and we have, he has some claim to pretending to know what he's talking about, right? And he's here to talk to us about this, right? So Jillian set the context for you guys as to what I was about to launch in, right? If you just logged on and I started into this without that bit of context, or the context that you walked into this meeting with, right? Which is, oh, we're going to learn about phone organizing and active listening, right? Whereas if I just picked up the phone and called you and started saying these things to you, you probably rightfully surmise that I'm a crazy person, right? So context is really important, right? It's really important to provide that. Another example would be, we're all guilty of this. Volunteer calls us and we're like, yeah, I'll come volunteer. But when the candidate calls you and they're like, hey, could you help me out? You're like, I will be there for you, right? There's also context at play there, right? Whether it's, people want to be in the good graces of the elected official, the sense of celebrity that kind of it goes around with running for office. There's a lot of different, dime store psychology games that you can play there. But point is that it's, moving on to the next one. But the point is to identify yourself early by providing the appropriate context sets the tone for the rest of the conversation. If you don't do that, they're going to be playing catch up with you, trying to figure out, wait, who's this person and why are they asking me about what's going on Saturday? So this really helps, help provide them with the context that they need. The second piece, so for one, identify yourself early, provide that context. The second piece of advice, try to start a conversation, not a lecture, right? That involves ideally listening more than you're talking, right? And that can be harder to do on the phone than it is, for example, at doors. But you can do it at a much higher rate over the phone, right? You're going to talk to more people per hour, especially with a predictive dialer, than you'll be able to. And really quick, anybody understand analog dialing versus predictive dialing? Probably worth going over that. So analog dialing is what we've all thought of as phone banking for the most part, right? You either get a paper list or you get a virtual phone bank, right? You click through and it gives you a phone number. You dial the number into your phone, you hit send, the phone rings, they pick up or they don't, right? For those of us who have done that over the years, when I started doing management and stuff like this in about 2010, we were getting about 23 to 25% pickup rates when we would call people. So basically 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 people would answer the phone when you would call. And we were annoyed about that because it was way too low in our opinion. Anybody know what the average number is on a campaign now? Anybody want to guess? So for cell phones on a good day, it's about 10, 12%. And landlines is somewhere between 1 and 3%. So for those of you guys who've been doing phone banking recently, and it seems like you're getting lots of not homes, you're not crazy. There has been a shift to fewer folks answering phones. So that's where predictive dialers come in really, really handy. So predictive dialers, for those of you guys who haven't used them, it's a software program that allows you to, you log into it online, you type in your phone number, your phone rings, you answer your phone, and it plugs you into a system. And what that system does is it calls like 10 people at once, knowing that only 2 or 3 will pick up at most. It's really more like 1 or 2. And that there's at least 3 people that are ready to answer a call. So essentially what it does is you never hear a phone ring and you never get an answering machine, right? There'll be periods of silence. And then as soon as someone answers the phone, you jump on with them. So for those of us who remember telemarketers in the heyday of the 90s, remember how when you'd pick up the phone and there'd be a pause, but we'd be like, hello, hello, and then they would jump in like a couple seconds late? That they were using earlier generation predictive dialers that had a bigger gap. The ones we have now, you still get that a little bit, but it's a lot smaller, right? So when at all possible, I always encourage folks to get familiar with predictive dialers. Smaller campaigns often have trouble affording them and or don't have enough call volume to really justify the cost. But pretty much every bigger campaign, when I say bigger, congressional or bigger, will have them for most of their outreach. And then a lot of other campaigns will do it, whether it's around GOTV or during like a crunch time of persuasion season. Yeah, Christine.
Is that the one through your computer where you might end up connecting with someone in another county or another part of the state?
Well, so it depends on how they set it up. Yeah. So if it's a statewide list that they set up, for example, like the coordinated campaign or the governor, then it will likely be the whole state, and you could be, connecting with anybody. In a congressional race, it'll likely just be within that congressional. It depends on how they want to set it up. So they can also set it up so that it is county by county, depending on what the needs are. So it can be set up any of these ways.
Okay.
Dondi.
Okay, sorry. Does that also, if that dials up and they get an answering machine or a voicemail, does that connect you or?
No, so what it does, most systems, it depends on the system, but most of them, what they do is they have a recorded message that they'll leave on a voicemail automatically. So if it gets a voicemail, it automatically leaves a recorded message. And the nice thing about leaving a voicemail is you can't tell if it's a recorded message or a live message because it's a recording anyway. So in some ways that can be better. They're not better, but it's still helpful. But so generally speaking, you don't get answering machines. Once in a while you do. It's not a perfect system, but for the most part, you'll be going from talking to one person to the other pretty quickly, with a short gap in between. So that's the difference between predictive dialing and analog dialing. The advantages to analog dialing is, it's slower and you get a lot more not-homes. You spend a lot more time listening to phones ring. But predictive dialers cost money and require some expertise to get set up. Whereas, conventional list, as you guys know, you can just sort of print out a list of names and phone numbers, make the calls, and mark it as you go, right? So there's advantages to both. But generally speaking, if you can afford doing predictive dialing, I highly recommend. In the past, predictive dialers have been limited only to landlines, but there's been some changes that now allow you to use predictive dialers to call cell phones as well. But anyway, so back to effective outreach strategies, right? So we want to start a conversation, not give somebody a lecture. So first of all, resist the urge to try to give the voter too much information off the bat, and try to, give them opportunities to cut in. Never, ever interrupt them, right? Let them go. If they say something that you disagree with, but isn't necessarily something, if they say something that you disagree with, ignore it, right? The point is to deliver your message to your voter, right? Not get them to agree with you on every single point, right? So if they're like, yeah, I hate organized labor. Well, okay, but I still need you to vote for Democrats here, okay? So maybe there's another reason that you want to vote for Democrats, or, whatever the issue may be, right? Which leads me into the third bit of strategy here, which is ask questions, right? What's that hokey old saying? God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Well, they're right? The more listening you can do as an organizer, the better, right? Having someone that feels heard and listened to, and that you're someone who's genuinely responding to what they're saying, other than waiting for them to finish talking and drop in a talking point, right? It opens them to talk to you like a real human being. And it removes so much of the vitriol and the standoffishness that you see when you try to approach it from a more sort of rigidly political context. So, and this doesn't apply on phones, but like at doors, for example, when I go to knock on somebody's door, I'll talk to them about, the car I see half built in the backyard that they're working on, right? I'll mention the Cubs W flag they've got, right? And talk about how our bullpen sucks. Anything that you can do to engage with somebody before you launch into the whole political whatnot is important. Now, again, you still want to identify yourself right away to give people context. Don't just call them up and be like, hey, what do you think of the Cubs bullpen? Anyway, politics. Right. Like, that's not how you want to approach it, but being able to, like I said, having a legitimate human one-on-one conversation with somebody, and listening to what they say and guiding the conversation based on their feedback is really important. Right. And there's three kinds of questions that I want to focus on. So the first one is the open-ended question, right? This is the most common one that you'll be using. And it's a way to try to get them to start talking. So say, I'm Ben, I'm a volunteer with Congresswoman Schakowsky. I'm just calling folks in the neighborhood today to ask, what issues do you think are most important to you or are most important to other people in your community? Right? So what's most important to you / what's most important to people in your community? So one, people sometimes have trouble sharing what's important to them, right? It can be personal, maybe they don't want to talk about it, or, in relation to themselves. But when you say, okay, but what are you hearing? What do people think? They'll tell you what they really, right? So that's generally how you can pull that information out of them. Now, sometimes what they might say is, I don't know, people around me are, crazy right-wing nut jobs, so they think a different way, but I think like this. That's an important bit of information to get out of them too. And you also just got them to open up a little bit. Oh, okay, so so this person's a progressive, this person's a lefty. They live in a Republican neighborhood, or they perceive it to be a Republican neighborhood, right? And every little bit of information that they give you like that helps you better have a meaningful conversation, right? So the little information that you get in the phone bank, so, name, age, gender, location is usually what you get. That can give you information as well, right? For example, if I'm talking to a 96-year-old woman, I'm going to have a different tone of voice than if I'm talking to a 25-year-old man, right? And, you can call it code switching, but, you guys may think of it as I've always referred to as the customer service voice, right? So I'm talking to you right now in my normal cadence. But, if I was talking to you as maybe, somebody that I wanted to recruit and I didn't know you yet, I might talk a little bit higher like this and sound a little bit less assured in the hopes that that'll help bring you out of your shell a little bit. So just as an example, right? So switching up sort of how you're approaching people based on who you're talking to can be important. But anyway, back to questions. I'm jumping all over, guys. I'm sorry. The second type of question that's important is the question that is actually your excuse to answer it. All right, this is my favorite one. So, oh man, did you see the debate last night? No, what debate? Oh yeah, no, I guess it wasn't on TV. It was just over at the school gym. But anyway, this Republican said this amazingly awful thing, right? So instead of just calling them and saying, hey, I want to tell you about this awful thing somebody said, right? Or I want to tell you about this awesome thing a Democrat said, right? Rather than coming at them directly, they can say, hey, did you hear what happened at the forum last night or the debate last night? Did you hear what this candidate said in the newspaper yesterday, right? That's a hook that'll get to say, no, I didn't. What's going on, right? And that gives you an opportunity to deliver your message, right, in a way that is effective. So the third one is sort of a direct ask about an issue or a policy, right? So, you might say, hi, my name is Ben. I'm a volunteer. I'm calling Jan Schakowsky. Just wanted to know real quick, a few quick questions for you. What are your feelings on the repeal of Roe versus Wade? And you always want to end that first bit of it with a question, because you're trying to get them to start answering the question. Once they've started answering the question, it gives you a much better opportunity to engage in a real conversation with them, right? Because they've started talking to you now. the Canvas equivalent to this is, some people are just waiting for you to finish your sentence so they can slam the door in your face politely, though. That's how some people do it with phone. That's actually more common on the phones than in person, right? So they're waiting for you to finish your shticks and say, okay, no, thank you, and then hang up. But when you end with a question, right, it prompts them to answer it, right? And these aren't tricks that work better or worse on Democrats or Republicans or different groups. These are just sort of tricks to get people to keep talking to you for a few seconds. This is stuff that, door-to-door salesmen would have used back when that was still a thing. The good news is this whole politics thing doesn't work out for us. We go sell some vacuum cleaners. We would be fantastic at that. So I want to sort of cut it there. I've got a little bit more about how to organize phones and stuff like that, but we're running really short on time. I think I only have about 3 more minutes. So I just wanted to see if anybody has any particular questions about anything I brought up or anything to clarify or any thoughts.
So you can unmute to ask a question if you have one, or you can also put it in the chat and I will read the question out if you have a question.
I use dialers for other things, but do you have a preferred dialer that you use for this?
I do. Yeah, we're not before, so I can say that now. So the dialer that I really prefer right now is a program called Call Hub. What I enjoy about it is it has a predictive dialer as well as a text function that's all built into the same program, and it does automatic interface with NGP van. So you can cut a list in van, move it over to your predictive dialing or text banking without having to do an import-export, which just makes it a little bit cleaner and easier. And you can sort of go cross-platform. So you can text out a bunch of people and say, hey, are you interested in hearing more about your state representative candidate? And then you see, okay, I got 25 people that said yes. I'm going to move those 25 people. Well, it's bad example. You would move 25 into a dialer. 2,500 people into a dialer to then call them back and ask them if they want a yard sign, right? You can do all that within one program, which is nice. Through Talk and Through Text also have that feature. But I find that Call Hub, at least in terms of its text capabilities, is by far the best. The other thing that I like about it is when you do a predictive dialer, generally speaking, you need a laptop and a phone to use a dialer, right? Because the information pops up on your screen, like, oh, this is Jimmy I'm talking to. Hey, Jimmy, this is Ben. I'm calling blah, 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 right? What's nice about Call Hub is that you can do it all within a single iPhone or Android app. So if someone shows up to phone bank and they didn't bring a laptop, but they have a cell phone, they can still use the predictive dialer. Whereas that isn't true with some of them. So for a bunch of reasons, right? That's my favorite.
Thank you.
Sure thing. And Lee, you have a question?
I do. Hi, Ben. Hi, everyone. So I just want to, like, with today's technology, it seems that I have gotten better responses with texting. Like, people immediately block you or respond, or the other part is that you know that they're seeing it. So I think texting is almost the ultimate. And most people, even 90-year-olds, have cell phones.
Oh, sure. So I'm probably the biggest believer in text messages that you'll talk to, at least in terms of field right now. I'm a huge believer in them. They can't do everything. So what they're very good at are, we know somewhere between 90-92% of texts get read, right? Way higher than pickup rates. Not everybody responds, but almost everybody reads every text message they get, right? You don't pick up every phone number that calls you. So there's a big edge there. The problem with texting is that there's no meaning. It's much harder to do a real two-way conversation. Because first of all, about half the time people think they're talking to a robot. But it's a lot harder to engage in two-way conversation where you can get genuine persuasion. So texting is good at things like GOTV. It's good at volunteer recruiting, small dollar fundraising. Basically, when you don't need to convince somebody that you are right or that you are somebody that should be supported, but that you have to convince them to take a particular action at that moment. right? Donate $5 today, show up to my meet and greet tomorrow, and vote on Tuesday. Very, very good for that. It's really not so great when it comes to persuasion. So if you're trying to convince a swing voter, middle of the road as to why your candidate is good, or maybe a leaning Republican, why your candidate is somebody that they should support, texting it's a much less effective tool for that kind of outreach than it is for trying to spur a particular action at a particular time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm just thinking of, like our congressional candidate in the 12th who doesn't have much money, and time is limited. I think that I think maybe in that case, that's the best is to text. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. And I have had some
34 counties. Yeah.
Oof, yeah, no, that's huge. And I have had success with doing persuasion ID texting. Right now, there's some state legislative folks that I'm helping out in North Shore that are doing it, and they're getting about a 5% response rate on their text, which is really, really high. A statewide campaign I was helping out during the primary got closer to like 0.8, 0.9% response rate on those questions. So depending on where somebody falls in that, where the district falls in that spectrum probably makes a difference. The average cost, if you're doing these texts at really high volume, $250,000 or more, you're probably getting them for about 4 cents a piece, somewhere in that neighborhood. You really won't get a price break much lower than that till you get significantly higher. The one exception to that, there's a company called Spoke that does incredibly cheap text messages, but their customer service isn't very good, and the system itself is very clunky. So if you don't really know what you're doing, it's easy to screw it up. So I hope that answers your question, Dundee. Generally speaking, you're looking at about 5.5, 6 cents if you're looking at buying under 100,000.
Thanks, Ben.
Sure. Anything else before? Because I think my time is up actually, so I should probably.
How do we get more information?
Oh, sure. More information about predictive dialing, or?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Tell you what, let me put my email in the chat. Feel free to shoot me any questions you have, and I can hopefully I can answer them. There we go. Well, guys, thank you for putting up with my over-caffeinated self. I hope this was somewhat helpful. And, if I can just have you remember 3 things walking out of here today, it's, start a conversation, not a lecture, ask questions, and identify yourself early. All right, you can do those things successfully. I think you'll see the quality of your phone conversations, whether it's persuasion ID, GOTV, or recruiting, all go up significantly. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ben. And we'll see you at the next one.
Sounds good.
Thank you.